Modern technologies not only make our lives easier, but also allow us to look into such depths of existence that give us goosebumps, because what we discover there radically changes our ideas about familiar reality and, in particular, about life after death. What amazing facts confirm the existence of the other world and how dead people try to contact the living. Since ancient times, people have believed that dead people often try to contact the living and convey to them some important information, or at least inform them that existence does not end after death. This is especially true for those who were deeply in love, or were eager to talk about how they died, if, for example, they were killed or went missing. Materialists have always believed that these were idle inventions, or, at worst, just hallucinations. But everything changed in the spring of 1959, when this belief gained its scientific confirmation. It happened randomly, but in the end it forced many scientists to closely study this issue, and the discoveries that they made were so shocking that at first they were even afraid to make them public. But let's go back to 1959, when the Swedish artist and opera singer Fredrik Jurgensen was making films about art. For the film, he needed a recording of birdsong. He went out of town to record them on a tape recorder. And everything would have been fine, but when he returned home and listened to his tapes, he was amazed by what he heard on them. There were sounds there that could never have been there. For some time the artist was in a stupor. He listened to the recordings several times at different speeds. And every time, through the bird trills, someone's excited whisper broke through and said the following: "Friedrich, if you can hear me, be careful, you are being watched." Just in case, the artist checked that the tape recorder was working properly. It turned out to be completely fine. And then Friedrich suddenly began to tremble, because he finally recognized the voice on the tapes. It was the voice of his dead mother. These messages from the other world turned the whole life of Fredrik Jurgensen upside down. He began to regularly make new recordings on his tape recorder and thus receive more and more messages from the dead, and in different languages. Many of which he understood because he was a polyglot. The artist had an excellent command of Russian, Ukrainian, Estonian, and German languages and, to a lesser extent, some others. And yet, despite the unambiguity of communication and their source, Friedrich, being a materialist, initially tried to explain this phenomenon by the fact that waves from some radio stations were breaking through in his recording. However, soon all the assumptions with which the researcher could justify the appearance of these voices were destroyed, since he often made recordings so far from any sources of radio broadcasting that the message could not be explained by this. He was finally convinced that modern technology is capable of reading from space what is inaccessible to ordinary human perception. And these are the very messages from the other world that our ancestors often talked about in mystical stories, and what was previously considered fiction has now received scientific confirmation. This means that humanity is very close to understanding what death is and what life is after it. The messages from the other world that he managed to receive were not very deep in content. They were all brief, as if the voice coming from there was not allowed to reveal all the secrets. Maybe most likely it took a lot of strength and energy to convey even short phrases to deceased people. After many years of experimentation, in 1964 Friedrich published a book called Voices of the Universe. In it, he openly declares to the whole world about his discovery. It instantly became a bestseller and sparked a wave of similar research around the world. And one of the most prominent followers of the study of the secrets of the underworld turned out to be Konstantin Raudive, a Latvian writer, philosopher, and student of Carl Jung. He subsequently became a leading researcher on this topic. His very first independent efforts did not bring him any fruit. But one day the scientist managed to receive the first message. Guided by the methodology of Fredrik Jurgensen, Konstantin Raudive managed to record thousands of messages from the other world. Moreover, some souls on these recordings named their names and reported that they were in one dimension. Many turned to him directly, uttering phrases that, on the one hand, made the blood run cold, and on the other, brought the understanding that another reality really exists. Every now and then he received messages of this kind. It's you who's dead and we're alive. You're listening to a lot of dead people. The dead are alive, Konstantin. There is no death here, the world is death. The researcher also managed to receive news from his deceased mother, who addressed him as she loved to call him in childhood. This finally convinced him of the reality of what was happening, because only he and his mother knew this name. After a successful series of experiments, Raudive wrote a book called Breakthrough. He dedicated it to the phenomenon of voices from the underworld. In it, he published only a part of the messages he received, and these are 27,000 audio messages. Like the book of its predecessor, it instantly became a worldwide hit, and forced many scientists to take up the study of this topic even more thoroughly. Of course, not all representatives of the scientific community believed in the authenticity of Konstantin Raudive's recording. The researchers' notes were subjected to careful analysis. Experts did not doubt the presence of voices on the tapes, but many of them were sure that all the messages received by Konstantin Raudive were accidentally caught radio waves. To dispel doubts, not long before his death, he repeated his experiments in the presence of other scientists. The experiment was carried out in a studio equipped with special equipment that excluded any accidental or intentional exposure to electromagnetic waves. The recording on magnetic tape was made on 3 devices, the control of which was prohibited for Raudive himself. While the recording was being carried out for 18 minutes, nothing was recorded except silence. And everyone already thought that the experiment had failed, and Rowdy himself was just a charlatan. But when the tape was listened to, dozens of messages from dead people were found on it. It is difficult to convey in words the excitement and fear that gripped everyone present, because the dead were speaking to them, that is, those in whose existence they refused to believe. For the sake of truth, it should be said that further analysis of the phenomenon of afterlife voices showed that recording of messages does not occur when the equipment operates in an empty room without the presence of a person. For this reason, some scientists believe that the thoughts of those present are recorded on magnetic tape, and not the voices of a being from the other world. But most likely the answer is even simpler: a person plays the role of a kind of conductor of subtle energies, without which it is difficult to convey messages from the other side of existence. Scientists also found that to record voices from the afterlife, it is better to use a reception frequency of 1485 kHz, which today is called the Jurgensen frequency, in honor of the first researcher of this phenomenon. By the way, in his declining years, Friedrich Jurgensen did not stop his research activities in the field of studying the phenomenon of afterlife voices, gave many public lectures around the world, and predicted that humanity would soon be able to receive a similar message on television. His prophecy, as we know, came true. As for Konstantin Raudive, after many personal experiments, he published another book dedicated to contact with the other world, entitled Can We Survive Our Death? To this day, it is considered a classic work for those involved in the research of paranormal phenomena. The facts and conclusions contained in it say a lot about the true state of affairs regarding the phenomenon of death. In addition to his books, Rowdy left behind a large number of tape recordings and protocols. One part of them was sent to a special archive in England, and the other is kept in a special memorial room, where visitors can not only see them, but also listen. And what is captured on these recordings leaves no one indifferent, since they contain the invisible breath of the afterlife, giving goosebumps to even the most inveterate skeptics. It is important to note that even such a serious person as the outstanding inventor Thomas Edison, who certainly cannot be accused of charlatanism or a senseless waste of time, paid his tribute to scientific interest in the topic of contact with dead people. His rational mind was always tuned only to facts. So he believed that the personal quality of a person, his characters of consciousness, do not disappear after the death of the physical body, but only move into a new plane of existence. The great inventor was so convinced of the reality of the existence of the afterlife that he actively worked on creating an electronic device that would allow him to receive information transmitted by the souls of the dead. Some researchers of his biography claim that he succeeded, and he actually assembled a device resembling a voice recorder, with the help of which he communicated with the dead. All this indicates that extensive study of this topic is not without meaning, and it is worth paying the closest attention to, since it contains the key to the most important mystery of humanity, which we would all like to unravel and find out what awaits us on the other side of life. Every year, more and more scientists are exploring the phenomenon of transmitting messages from the other world, increasingly lifting the veil of the mystery of death. And more people are joining this research.